Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome. My name is Marilyn Zakhour. I'm the founder and CEO of Cosmic Centaurs, a leadership and organizational development firm. And today, you're joining me for the opening session of the 7th Cosmic Conference, a 3-week virtual conference taking place between March 25th and April 17th. While the Cosmic Conference is typically held in October, the pace and gravity of events across the region made it clear to us that this conversation couldn't wait. To support leaders when they need it the most, we chose to bring this year's edition forward and convene this conversation now. Through this conference, we're hoping to support leaders as they manage the prolonged uncertainty that we're experiencing in the GCC, the Levant, and the world. I want to start the session differently from how I've opened conferences before. One of the loneliest things about leadership right now is the pressure to appear like you know what to do, like you know what's coming next, and none of us do. There's a particular temptation for me, standing here on stage, to present a version of myself that has it figured out, because I'm trying to be your guide. But I'm not going to do that. Moments like this don't ask for certainty. They demand honesty. We're all leading in multiple places at once, in our work, yeah, but also in families, in friend groups, in communities. For me, there have been, and I'm sure there will be moments where the safety of my family and the survival of my company are asking different things of me, where no option feels neutral. Like all of you, I'm someone who's trying to make the right calls with incomplete information, asking myself whether the way I'm running things or making decisions will live up to the moment. On a particular tough day, a couple of weeks ago, I spoke to a friend on the phone about the situation and how difficult it was to lead through it. He reminded me, he said, "Cosmic Centaurs was born in a time like this. You know how to do this." So in my head, I traveled back to our first year. I traveled back to one of our origin stories for inspiration, and I want to tell you about it. I want to tell you about how the Cosmic Conference actually started and how this connects to this edition here, 6 years later. So I want you to travel back to July 2020. As a company, we're just a few months old. The world is in full lockdown, and leaders are sitting at home, managing remote teams, many of them for the first time, making decisions under a level of uncertainty that most of us had never encountered before. And the places, the offices, the conferences, the convenings, the professional spaces where we could have gone to make sense of things together had disappeared. And Tala and I, and the team that was with us that early, period, looked at that situation and we thought, someone needs to do something about this. And of course, we have a dining room table to picture to prove it. But we really thought that we needed to show up, right? We thought that this was a time for us to jump in. And so in less than 10 days, we organized a 2-day conference on the future of work. We're proud to say we had 18 speakers, 6 panels, 1,500 attendees. And we like to joke that we were the first people to run a Future of Work conference. And that experience crystallized a belief that has been at the center of everything we do since. That when leaders are left to fend for themselves, our job is to jump in. And this 7th edition exists for exactly the same reason that the first one did. We didn't know in July 2020 whether anyone would show up. But they did, and then they came back the following year and the year after that. And with each edition, something happened that we hadn't fully planned for, but that was truly magical. The community that formed around the conference became honestly just as valuable as the conference itself. Leaders who'd met in breakout sessions are still calling each other years later. People who might have sat together in a workshop are collaborating across industries and countries in ways that none of us had anticipated. And I'm very proud to say that most recently, a couple that met at one of our events got married. Congrats, Taha and Camille. I hope you live a long, beautiful, and love-filled life. The conference is more than a conference. It creates connective tissue that extends far beyond any event or webinar. It's a space for leaders and individuals to come together to think carefully, honestly, in genuine community. And that's why we're here. And it's who we are here for. So in preparation for this conference, we spoke to leaders to hear about what they were facing, what would feel helpful. The first thing they spoke to us about is this new kind of certainty, a layered certainty. We're no longer just dealing with one crisis at a time. We're dealing with multiple intersecting pressures. We have geopolitical risk, economic volatility, still the acceleration of technology. And we see across sectors from hospitality to services, we see reducing demand, changing client behavior, revenues less predictable. Supply chains are being disrupted. The cost and uncertainty of basic operations is rising. And in parallel to all of that, we're still trying to make sense of AI. And we're still trying to deliver on national vision programs that accept no delays. That was the first thing leaders shared with us. The second thing is the compression and complexity of decision timelines. The window between something becoming relevant and something requiring a decision has essentially collapsed. We're making big consequential calls on the basis of incomplete information, under time pressure, while also managing the human reality of our teams. People who are looking to us for steadiness, for safety, while we're still figuring things out. And the third thing that came out really strongly, and I think this is the one that maybe we talk about least, is fatigue. Real, deep, structural fatigue. Leaders who've been operating in a state of managed urgency for so long, at least since the pandemic, they haven't been able to catch their breath. And teams that have adapted and readapted and adapted again and been flexible, and they're starting to wonder whether there is a version of their work life or their life that doesn't feel like permanent triage. And alongside all of this, something more personal. Leaders trying to hold their teams, but also managing their own uncertainty, regulating their nervous system, staying sane, trying to lead from above the line in a world that keeps trying to pull them down. That is the individual story. And the organizational story is that in this context, organizations respond, sadly, in very predictable ways. They contract, they protect margins, they fire people, they reduce headcount, they pause investments. They focus almost exclusively on surviving the next quarter. And of course, none of that is foolish. Survival is not an option. You can't build the future of a company that doesn't exist. But what history tells us is that organizations that emerge from periods of disruption as stronger versions of themselves, those are not the ones that survived the most efficiently. They're the ones that used the difficulty to become the next better version of themselves. That's why we titled our conference Grounded and Limitless, leading organizations that don't just survive, but also thrive. And while at first glance, these two words seem in tension, grounded is being connected to reality, to the present, to what is actually happening. If you take a more humorous approach to this word, it means we're being punished. For planes, it means they can't take off. But limitless is about possibility, the future, what could be. Grounded and limitless together is the capacity to face reality without being defined by it, to be clear-eyed about your constraints without treating them as the ceiling of what is possible. That is what the best organizations do in periods of disruption. They protect what is essential and they build what's next at the same time. During the pandemic, we saw similar variations in how companies responded. Amongst the companies that we worked with, some went into full defensive mode, cutting costs, protecting cash, and waiting for clarity that never came. Others moved differently. They were still making hard decisions, but they were a bit more deliberate. They protected what mattered, but they also asked, what is emerging? What do we need to build now to be ready for what comes next? One of those companies that I loved working with was more than 100 years old. They'd been founded before the First World War. They'd survived the Great Depression, the Second World War, multiple regional crises, the oil shocks, the digital disruption of the 90s and the 2000s. And throughout that century, they had reinvented themselves over and over and over again. And what struck me, sitting in meetings with their leadership team, was how calm they were. They assessed the situation clearly, they knew what they didn't know, but they weren't paralyzed by it. They made decisions at speed, but they didn't feel frantic. And when you asked them about it, which I did very directly, they said, we've been here before. Not in the sense that that particular leader had been there before, but in the sense that as a company, they knew exactly what was going to happen. They knew, they had institutional memory. They knew how to navigate disruption. They went beyond anything that could be held in the mind of a single leader. It was in their processes, in their culture, in the way they hired people, or the kind of conversations that they considered normal, the speed at which they could make and change a decision. This resilience wasn't personal, it was systemic. And that observation, that resilience at its most powerful, is not simply a leadership trait, but an organizational capability, is what we're here to talk about. And we're here to talk about how to build it. Now, of course, it wouldn't be us if we didn't bring a bit of theory and a few definitions. And I know that for people in the region, for people from the same country as me, Lebanon, the word resilience is definitely triggering. But organizational resilience, as defined by Gary Hamel, is the ability to dynamically reinvent your business models and your strategy rather than simply recovering from shocks. So if we want to accomplish resilience for organizations, how do we build it? We're here to bring you a bit of sanity through the research, because research on resilience is not new. Human beings have been surviving crises for as long as they've existed. And the last century alone has brought us so much of that, and a lot of research to come with it. So maybe we can bring you some answers through the research that we reference when it comes to resilience and crisis management. Of course, the situation and the economic instability has called a lot of us to spend a lot of time thinking about our P&Ls. So we wanted to start with the financial world. We wanted to start with money, because the most ethical thing that a company can do is survive. And we're here to help you do that. In the pandemic, we were asked by the CEO of a global company to come and talk to his team about resilience. And I was very proud to find this, because this spoke directly to the CFO's heart. The Altman Z-score, is the formula that was published in the 60s that originally was used for predicting bankruptcy. Now, it turns out that in times of crisis, this particular score is a better predictor of a company's ability to survive the next few years than its stock price. Because, and I'm sure none of you will be surprised, as it turns out, in moments of disruption, stock prices are noisy and unreliable. This week alone has proved that to all of us. So the Z-score, as you can see here, cuts through the noise, and it asks a more fundamental question, not about people's perception of the future value of a company, but about whether or not the underlying organism is healthy. It measures companies across three things. Are they good at improving margin? Are they good at growing revenue? But also, and very importantly, are they good at maintaining optionality? Meaning, are they preserving the financial capacity to invest in their future? And are they actually investing in it? Because we love this, because what it tells us is that financial resilience is not a defense game, although it does feel like that these days. Organizations that cut everything in a crisis and only optimize for survival find themselves, when the conditions improve, without the capabilities, the relationships, or the assets to take advantage of what opens up, because inevitably something will. They may have survived, but they survived into a weaker position. The organizations that navigate disruptions most effectively are the ones that hold both defense and offense at the same time. A company that is improving its margin, yes, building up its revenue, and maintaining optionality is not only more likely to survive, it's more likely to thrive at the other end of the crisis. These three things, held in balance, are what financial resilience look like in practice. So then comes the question, how are we then to build organizations and people that deliver these three things? The second piece of research that I come back to most often on the topic of resilience is Diane Cotu's work. She asks a deceptively simple question. Why do some people, and by extension some organizations, bounce back from disruptions when others do not? And what Cotu found across a wide range of studies and observations is that resilient people share three defining characteristics. The first one is their ability to accept reality as it is. Not a hopeful, wishful version of reality, but the actual situation as it is. She tells the story of Admiral James Stockdale, the highest-ranking U.S. officer held captive in Vietnam. He understood this better than most. He was imprisoned for almost 8 years, endured brutal conditions, daily beatings, isolation. His fellow prisoners, who only held on to optimism, who convinced themselves they'd be home by Christmas, then Easter, then Thanksgiving, those were the individuals who broke first. They had false hope, and it shattered against the weight of reality. But those who, like him, saw the truth clearly, who endured without illusions, those were the ones who survived. And he survived, but by embracing what would later be known as the Stockdale paradox. And he quotes it this way. He says, "You must never confuse faith that you will prevail in the end, which you can never afford to lose, with the discipline to confront the most brutal facts of your current reality, whatever they may be." That's the first characteristic. The second one is the ability to find meaning in the disruption. This doesn't mean pretending that things happen for a reason or suffering is a gift, which in my culture is something we like to do. It means the capacity to frame what is happening in a way that reconnects it to something larger, to a set of values or a purpose. Andy Grove, the former CEO of Intel, wrote about this in the context of what he called strategic inflection points. Moments when the fundamentals of your environment shift so deeply that the old ways of operating simply don't work. What he observed was that in those moments, organizations that navigated the transition best were the ones that were anchored in a clear sense of what they stood for. When the path is unclear, purpose becomes a form of direction. It allows people to keep moving, even when they don't know exactly where they're going. When the map is missing, purpose is the compass. And the third characteristic, which I love the most, and I love its name, is the ability to improvise. Cotu calls it ritualizing ingenuity. And that means working with what you have, making do, adapting, being creative. She borrows this concept from anthropology. She calls it bricolage, the practice of constructing something useful from whatever materials are at hand. And resilient organizations are bricoleurs. They don't wait for the perfect conditions. They act with what they have, and they build from there. Another example we love is from the turnaround of Renault in the early 2000s, where this capability was very well represented. The company was under intense pressure, limited resources, very little room for error. And instead of waiting for ideal conditions, the leadership of the organization focused on what they did have. They had existing platforms and existing capabilities, and they started to recombine them in new ways. In the car industry, developing new platforms is extremely expensive. They did the opposite. They reduced the number of core components, they reused what was already working, and they built new models out of what was available rather than starting from scratch. It wasn't elegant, but it worked. And that is what ingenuity looks like in practice. Not innovation as a grand gesture, but as the disciplined ability to build with what is already in your hands. And what I find powerful about Kotu's work is all three of these things are in essence trainable, whether at the individual or the organizational level. You can build an organization that is better at facing reality by enabling the processes and the leadership behaviors that surface uncomfortable information rather than hide it. You can also build an organization that's better at finding and connecting meaning by being intentional about how you articulate and reinforce your purpose, your values, what you stand for in the world, what the world would miss if you didn't exist anymore. And you can build an organization that is better at improvising by creating psychological safety and making resources available that allow people to experiment without fear. These are design choices, and they're available to everyone in this room. And that is what our conference is hoping to help you with. And that's why we've designed it across these three themes, each running for a week and each building on the one before it. The first week is Endure. This is about what it actually takes to keep an organization alive when the environment is really hostile. And it does indeed mean facing reality as it is. For many of us, it'll mean making difficult calls and having hard conversations. This is where financial discipline comes in, where you may need to reduce costs and sadly let people go. What we want to ask ourselves here is, how do you make sure you're cutting costs but not cutting value? How do you lead your teams, whether they're staying or leaving, through those moments in a way that feels clear, fair, grounded, compassionate? And of course, how do you lead yourself? How do you reconnect to your own sense of purpose? How do you stay regulated so that you can make good decisions instead of reactive ones? We will explore these topics together through a series of webinars across all of next week on leading yourself, your teams, and your organizations through sustained uncertainty. And also, we have a workshop that's led by Danielle Delati, one of the most grounded people I know, focused on helping you actually name your purpose. Because that's a word we use often, but we don't always have the words for it. And you can sign up for that on the link in the comments or on our website. That's week 1, Endure. Endurance isn't glamorous, but it's what everything else depends on. Now, the second week starts to become a bit more positive. The second week is Adapt. Once you've stabilized what needs to be stabilized, the question becomes, how do you start moving again? This is where we go back from protecting the business to growing it. And to do that, you need to stay close to your market to sense what's changing. You need to find new ways of generating sustainable revenue, even if the environment remains shifty or uncertain for a long time. You need to create new offers, new ways of delivering value, new ways of working. And we're going to look at this from multiple angles, from business development, growth, innovation. We're going to talk about how to create the kind of environment where people are not just stuck in survival mode, but they're able to move forward productively. This is about building organizations that can sense, respond, evolve, without relying on a single leader to carry all of that. You will hear from leaders who are doing this in real time, building systems that can adapt and grow even under pressure. And we'll also host a closed roundtable for leaders in the professional services sector, just like us, in partnership with Astrolabs, so that we can come together as peers and sense what's happening in the market and maybe imagine together what might be possible next. And if you'd like to join us for that, reach out. We'd love to have you with us. And then our third week. Our third week is Thrive. As I told you before, organizations that come out of this strongest don't simply survive the crisis. They take everything they've learned in that crisis and they bring it back into the organization. Thrive is about integration. What do you do with everything you've learned? What does it look like to bring those learning backs into your business? How do you scale things? How do you turn your lessons into capabilities and resilience into systems? We will explore that through case studies and conversations and a final leadership integration session titled Grounded and Limitless to help you create spaces of stability and engines of change inside your teams and organizations. We will also drop the link for you to sign up to that in the comments. And of course, as always, we will close off the conference with one of my mentors, Professor José Santos, who has been my partner on this journey since the first edition. He came to every closing of every conference, and this time will be no different. And we will reflect together on everything that we've learned and what the way forward can be. And lastly, I want to tell you about all the voices that you're going to hear from. The majority of speakers at this conference, they're leading and building and navigating organizations in the Arab world. This isn't accidental. Any of you who live here, who have been here over the last few years, know that there is a particular experience that comes from having led here. An emerging market where the rules are always being rewritten, where national visions have transformed economies, where, let's face it, the geopolitical backdrop is never entirely stable, and where the pace of change is sudden and often profound. Leaders here have learned to be adaptive and improvise in ways enormously relevant to the situation that we face today. But over and above that, they also have a particular set of leadership qualities that emerge under pressure, a capacity for containment, which Wissam will be talking to us about, their ability to face reality, not minimize or dramatize it, but communicate with calm, making uncertainty feel manageable. It's certainly what we've seen in the UAE over the last few weeks. They have a bias towards presence. They don't disappear, they show up, they're visible, they're in proximity to the people they lead. They have a deep sense of responsibility for others. Their leadership is rooted in care, in community, and a hospitality that becomes protection. And they have grounded adaptability, the ability to move quickly, to improvise, but never losing coherence or direction. This is leadership that is built on steadiness, on absorbing complexity rather than amplifying it, on creating stability so people can keep moving, even when the ground is shaking. And at Cosmic Centaurs, we've made it our mission to elevate the leadership stories from this region. I think the world has a lot to learn from us. And if you're tuned in, we will share a link to a survey on leadership made in the Arab world. We want to publish research on this topic, and we would be grateful if you could complete it for us and help us learn more about what you see as being the great leadership traits of this region. And so most of our speakers are CEOs, navigating the pressure of volatile conditions, managing boards, protecting teams, making long-term bets in short-term environments, and those who support them, executive coaches and advisors that are working with multiple leaders at once from here. We'll also hear from rapid response leaders like Aline or Maya, who are on the ground in Lebanon. And these leaders, they're making decisions not in monthly or quarterly cycles, but in hours. Both of these are forms of leadership under pressure, and both have something essential to teach us. We'll also, as always, hear from our community of international researchers and practitioners and thinkers, because the questions we're asking are universal, even if the answers are often local. And to close us off, there is something that happened yesterday morning that I want to share as an intention, for I hope how we will all show up. And in many ways, what is behind the spirit of this conference and everything that the Centaurs do. Someone who used to work with my father sent a newsletter yesterday to his community. And in it, he quoted him. My father owned an IT company. He passed away over a decade ago, and we weren't close. But reading those words, it felt like for a moment we were meeting in the same place. This is a quote from him during the 2006 Lebanon war. He said this to his team. He said, "I've lived through this before. Opportunities don't go away in a crisis. You just need to know where and how to look." In his case, he said, companies are relocating. They're in urgent need of laptops, servers, IT support. The opportunity is in being the only one who shows up while everyone else is waiting for things to go back to normal. You are already at their door, and that is the opportunity. And in strange ways, it echoes 20 years later with something I said to my team this week. Here's what I said. In times of uncertainty, what matters most is how firmly we step into our purpose and our values. When others shrug, we step in. When the world feels fragmented, we create space for community, connection, and cohesion. When things feel dark, we choose to be the light. As we head into our 7th conference, that's the intention we're carrying. And I think this is what this moment is asking of all of us, to stay grounded in what we can control and limitless in what we believe we can create together. Thank you for being here. Thank you for making the time, for bringing your attention, for trusting us with 3 weeks of your thinking life. We do not take that lightly. This is the Cosmic Conference 2026. The theme is grounded and limitless.